Our lecture is going to be about the UN human rights machinery, but I'm going to focus on one of the newer bodies of the UN human rights machinery, which is the Human Rights Council, and also a very new procedure, which is called the Universal Periodic Review. I think I'm going to point out some of the changes that have occurred organizationally to the UN human rights mechanisms, and point out the innovation that is captured within this new mechanism called Universal Periodic Review. So we see something of the Human Rights Council here. We should recall that the body I'm going to focus this lecture on is one where there are hundreds of people in one room. They are meeting for at least 10 weeks a year. We have the presence of high-level delegations from governments. We have very senior diplomats that would be in this council focusing their sole attention on human rights at the international level. And there will be a media presence. There are non-governmental organizations there. And, amongst them also victim groups, those whose human rights have been violated or their representatives. Now, the human rights machinery at the UN level is quite complicated, and we shouldn't be too narrow in how we capture and understand this. The reason I say this is that almost every UN agency, or whether at the local level, regional level, national level, or international level, every UN body should be concerned with human rights amongst its other activities. So whether it's a monetary agency, whether it's a development agency, whether it's working with, let's say, maternal health or child nutrition, or working in conflict, all UN activities should have human rights as part of their agenda, whether overtly so or whether, as a part of a range of concerns, including health and, eradicating polio or whatever it is. Nevertheless, when we talk about the UN human rights mechanisms, we mean some particular mechanisms. We're not talking about when the Security Council acts taking note of human rights violations in a country. We're not really talking about the World Health Organization. So in the narrower sense, the UN human rights mechanisms are of two types. One are charter-based bodies and the other are treaty-based bodies. And the distinction here is really quite simple. Treaty-based bodies draw their origin, their reason for being, their creation, to particular treaties that governments have been involved in drafting. They have voluntarily become bound by that treaty, just like any other treaty works. And because of accepting and ratifying that treaty, then they are obliged to respect it and report what progress they have made in realizing its objectives. So it's a treaty, it happens to have a human rights focus. And in the UN human rights mechanisms, we have 9 core human rights treaties. The treaties are not what I'm going to talk about today. It's the second prong of, or type of human rights mechanism, and these are the charter-based bodies. So these bodies are the ones that were created by virtue of the UN Charter in 1945, saying that one of the objectives of the United Nations was to ensure not only peace and stability, but also human rights. And just from that one commitment in 1945, over the past 6 to 7 decades, we have seen the evolution of a range of bodies to try to realize that UN Charter objective. So in the UN, of the complex web of human rights mechanisms the world over, local, national, regional, and international, I'm going to focus only at the international. I'm not going to look at the UN as a whole and how all of its activities everywhere should have human rights as part of their concern. I'm going to focus narrowly on what we call the UN human rights mechanisms. And we said they're of two types, treaty and charter. I'm going to only focus on the charter-based bodies.